What is going on, addicts? In this video, we are taking a look at the cream of the crop at wide receiver, Michael Thomas, wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints. Absolutely dominant year last year. What can we expect from him in 2020? Let's get into it. Hit that subscribe button for us and let's talk about it. So last year finishes with a NFL record 149 receptions, 1,725 receiving yards, and 9 total touchdowns. Good enough for 374.6 fantasy points on the year and 23.4 fantasy points per game, both first at the position. Obviously, last year came in as a top tier guy, but his ADP had him going around the beginning of the second round. So, had you started Dalvin Cook, Michael Thomas, that was probably the best possible start you could have had to your draft if you were drafting late last year and massively outproducing his ADP. A guy now that is being pushed into the first half of the first round. Now, I still expect him to finish, if not first, at least top three, assuming health. There's very hard to make a case that there's going to be enough receivers that see enough volume to overtake what Michael Thomas did last year and just the massive amount of blue weeks that he performed. Again, for those of you who are just watching the first time, blue means that he finishes a top 6 receiver on the week. The guy did it, what is that, 9 times out of 16 games. He finished as a top 6 receiver 9 times. He was just absolute money. Money in redraft, money in DFS. Just every week you're like, can I keep playing him? Well, yes, because he just kept dominating. And then the absolute tear of 3 straight 30-point games to round out your fantasy playoffs. Mwah. Just absolutely glorious. So he does get a little bit of competition with Emmanuel Sanders coming in, but Emmanuel Sanders plays a completely different game than Michael Thomas. I don't think it's going to hurt his value too much, if any at all. Alvin Kamara being healthy could affect his targets a little bit. I do think you can't expect him to come near the record-breaking season of 149 receptions again, but he should still be a 300-point fantasy receiver and is worth a first-round pick for that reason alone. It just comes down to what strategy you want to take and how badly you want your running backs to look because of how running back heavy drafts are this year. Haven't really gotten to many of our draft strategy videos yet. That's kind of the goal. After we get through all of these player breakdown videos, we'll get into more of those. But when it comes to overall looking at strategy this year, robust running back is very heavy. And there is some argument to go against the grain, but I do think if you punt running back for too long, you're going to regret it. And taking Michael Thomas in the first round, if you do it early, too early, it's going to really hurt you in the second round when all the running backs are gone. But getting him, from pick 106 onwards, which is typically around where he's going, I can't fault you for it. Because if he can come anywhere near the production that he did last year, it's most certainly worth it. Even if he regresses 10-15%, still probably worth where he's going. If he hits over 300 fantasy points, he's worth a first-round pick. So, again, 149 receptions. That's the NFL record. 33.2% freaking target share. Number 1 among receivers. 550 yards after the catch. That's number 3. 3.17 yards per pass route. Number 3 at the receiver position, and 94.9% true catch rate. Absolutely insane. Had the best target accuracy with Drew Brees throwing him the ball, and he had a 63.3% contested catch rate. Like, there wasn't really any metric to look at Michael Thomas's season last year and say anything negative about it. He basically has filled in the void of what Antonio Brown left behind. He's come in now and just become that dominant PPR receiver that outside of week 13 where he put up 10.8 points and week 17 where nobody was playing fantasy football anyway, he never disappointed you. He had one game the entire year he didn't score 10 points, and it was in week 17 where most people don't play fantasy. Like, if that's not the most consistent receiver, like, there was a point in time, I think, where Antonio Brown had at least like 5 receptions of 50 yards for a stretch of like over 20 games or something like that. I can't remember the exact stat. I just remember that being a thing where he was so consistent, scoring at least 10 fantasy points every single game, and that's exactly what Michael Thomas is doing for you now. But that stretch of 5 games in a row where he finished as a top 6 wide receiver, has a little bit of a down game against Atlanta, and then comes back with 3 straight 30-point games, and he even gives you the stealing of like a 41.2-point game where he scored against Tampa Bay with 182 receiving yards on 11 catches and 2 touchdowns. Just absolute bananas. Again, I don't fault you if you take him in the first round. I think Devontae Adams is going to be right there with him in terms of fantasy points this year. When you look at the construction of the Packers, I think Devontae Adams is slated for a absolute sick fantasy year and could push Michael Thomas for the #1 receiver. But if I had to make a bet on it, I'm not going to do it because Michael Thomas has been so productive over the course of the time that he's been there with the Saints. And while I don't really know what his long-term outlook looks like once Drew Brees is gone, we'll see if Jameis Winston ends up being the main quarterback for the Saints. This year is going to be great for Michael Thomas, and I fully understand and endorse taking him in the first round as long as you're comfortable with what your running backs are going to look like. I'm a little bit more inclined to go running back in the first round this year personally, but at some point you're being stupid passing up on what Michael Thomas can offer you. We have him projected to regress slightly, going down 123 receptions, 1,445 receiving yards, and 9 total touchdowns. That puts him at 322 fantasy points. But again, if a wide receiver can score north of 300 fantasy points, he is worth a first-round pick. There's only going to be a few running backs that hit 300 fantasy points, and maybe 2 receivers that hit that mark. So getting a guy in the first round that gets you over 300 fantasy points on the year is what you're aiming for. Absolutely love Michael Thomas this year. And obviously you're going to have to pay a pretty hefty price for him. But with that kind of consistency the season he had last year, you're just hoping that he comes anywhere close to that again. And you'll be thrilled with whatever you have to pay for him. So love it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button for more content like this, and we will see you guys in the next video.